The restaurant buzzed with the sound of clinking silverware and soft chatter as customers enjoyed their meals. It was just another evening at Mason's Grill, a popular spot in town known for its delicious steaks and warm ambiance. The dim lighting gave the place a cozy feel, and waiters moved swiftly between tables, ensuring that every guest was satisfied. At one of the corner booths, Karoline Leavitt sat with two friends, engaged in a deep conversation. She wasn't just any customer, she was a rising political figure, well known for her outspoken views. That night, she had come to the restaurant expecting a simple dinner, a quiet moment to unwind from the busy world of politics. However, things were about to take an unexpected turn. Across the room, the restaurant manager, a tall man in his late 40s named Greg Dawson, had his eyes fixed on her table. His expression was unreadable, but there was tension in his posture. He whispered something to a waiter before stepping forward, making his way toward Karoline's table with purpose. As he reached her booth, the chatter in the nearby tables quieted, sensing that something was about to happen. Greg cleared his throat, and Karoline and her friends looked up, surprised by the sudden interruption. "Miss Leavitt," Greg began, his voice firm but controlled, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." A confused silence followed. Karoline frowned, exchanging glances with her friends. "I'm sorry, is there a problem?" she asked, her voice calm but slightly puzzled. Greg crossed his arms. "We don't serve people like you here," he stated bluntly. Her friends gasped. A few nearby diners turned to watch, sensing the tension in the air. Karoline remained composed, but her eyes darkened slightly. "People like me?" she repeated. "I don't understand." Greg exhaled sharply, as if irritated that he had to explain. "You're a public figure, and frankly, we don't want any trouble. Some of our customers find your presence offensive, and we reserve the right to refuse service." The words hung in the air, thick with implication. Karoline's face remained neutral, but inside she was processing everything quickly. This wasn't about her personally, this was about what she stood for. A murmur spread through the restaurant. Some customers watched in silent agreement, while others seemed shocked by the blatant display of exclusion. One man whispered to his wife, shaking his head. Another woman looked uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. For a long moment, Karoline didn't move. Then slowly, she reached for her purse, her movements deliberate. "All right," she said, standing up. Her friends followed, looking equally stunned. But before turning to leave, Karoline did something no one expected. Instead of walking out in anger or causing a scene, she turned to the nearby tables, offering a calm but powerful smile. "I just want to say before I go that this kind of treatment, discriminating against someone because of their beliefs, is exactly what divides people," she said. "We may not all agree, but shutting each other out isn't the answer." Her voice was steady, and her words carried through the restaurant like a ripple in water. Some people nodded in agreement. Others looked away, unwilling to acknowledge the truth in her statement. Then, Karoline did something even more unexpected. She reached into her bag and pulled out a $100 bill. Turning to a waitress standing nearby, she placed it in her hand. "This is for you," she said warmly. "I know you work hard, and I hope you have a wonderful night." The waitress, clearly caught off guard, hesitated before accepting the money. A few customers started clapping, then more joined in. Within seconds, half the restaurant was applauding. Greg's face turned red. He had expected Karoline to storm out, maybe even lash out in frustration. But instead, she had handled the situation with dignity, turning what could have been a humiliating moment into one of grace. As she walked toward the exit, the applause continued. One man even stood up, tipping his hat in respect. "That's how you handle things," he muttered, shaking his head in admiration. Outside, the cool night air greeted Karoline as she took a deep breath. Her friends were still reeling from what had just happened. "I can't believe that," one of them muttered. "That was outrageous." Karoline simply smiled. "People will always try to shut you out when they don't agree with you," she said. "But how you respond, that's what matters." The next morning, the story had spread like wildfire. Social media was flooded with videos of the incident. Some condemned the restaurant manager's actions, calling it an unfair and divisive decision. Others praised Karoline for her calm and dignified response. News outlets picked up the story, debating whether businesses had the right to deny service based on political beliefs. Mason's Grill faced immediate backlash. Customers canceled reservations, and negative reviews poured in. Some longtime patrons declared they wouldn't return. Greg Dawson, the manager, was forced to issue a statement, but the damage was done. Meanwhile, Karoline's graceful handling of the situation only boosted her reputation. Supporters rallied behind her, praising her poise and refusal to engage in hostility. Even some of her critics admitted that she had handled the moment with surprising restraint. In the end, the incident did more than just expose a moment of bias. It sparked a conversation about tolerance, free speech, and how people should treat one another, even in disagreement. And as for Karoline Leavitt, she had turned a moment of rejection into one of quiet victory. The story didn't end there. In the days following the incident, the internet exploded with reactions. Videos from customers at Mason's Grill went viral, showing Karoline's poised response in real time. Some praised her for taking the high road, while others were outraged at the restaurant's actions. Debates flooded social media platforms, television networks picked up the story, and opinion pieces were written on both sides of the issue. Meanwhile, Mason's Grill was feeling the heat. Their Yelp and Google reviews plummeted overnight, with people leaving one-star ratings and comments like "shameful treatment of a customer" and "I'll never eat here again." Protesters even gathered outside the restaurant, holding signs that read "Freedom for all" and "No more discrimination." Greg Dawson, the manager who had kicked Karoline out, had never anticipated this level of backlash. At first, he stood by his decision, telling reporters that he had the right to refuse service to anyone. But as the pressure mounted, he started receiving calls from the restaurant's owner, who was furious about the negative attention. Regular customers who had dined at Mason's Grill for years were now boycotting the establishment, and reservations were being canceled left and right. Facing an uncertain future, Greg was forced to address the controversy publicly. In a hastily organized press conference outside the restaurant, he spoke to reporters. "It was never my intention to create such division," he said, trying to sound composed. "I made a decision that I thought was in the best interest of our customers at the time. However, I recognize now that it may not have been handled appropriately." But it was too late. The damage was done. The restaurant's reputation had taken a major hit, and it wasn't clear if it would ever fully recover. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt remained relatively quiet amid the storm. She wasn't interested in fanning the flames of controversy. Instead, she continued with her work, focusing on the causes she cared about. However, she couldn't ignore the overwhelming support she was receiving. Donations to her campaign surged, with messages from supporters pouring in. "We stand with you. You showed real leadership, and this is why we need more people like you in office." She finally broke her silence during an interview on a major news network. The host asked her about the experience, and Karoline remained as composed as ever. "Look," she said, "I didn't go to that restaurant to make a statement. I went there for a meal with friends, but what happened that night was bigger than me. It was about how we treat people with different viewpoints. We can disagree, but we should never silence each other. That's not what this country is about." Her response resonated with people across the political spectrum. Even those who didn't necessarily agree with her views found themselves respecting how she had handled the situation. But there was one final twist to the story. A week after the incident, Karoline received a message from someone unexpected, Greg Dawson. It was a long email, and in it, Greg admitted that he had been wrong. He explained that he had acted out of pressure from a few vocal customers, and that he had let personal biases cloud his judgment. He apologized sincerely, admitting that he had learned a valuable lesson from the fallout. Karoline could have ignored the message. She could have held on to resentment, knowing that Greg's actions had led to a public humiliation for him and his restaurant. But instead, She did something that truly shocked everyone. She responded with kindness. She wrote back, thanking Greg for his apology. She acknowledged that people make mistakes, and that what mattered was whether they learned from them. She even offered to meet for coffee and have a real conversation, not as adversaries, but as two people with different perspectives who could learn from each other. Greg was stunned. He hadn't expected forgiveness. He hadn't expected understanding. And yet, here was Karoline, extending an olive branch instead of seeking revenge. A few days later, the two sat down at a small cafe, away from the cameras and the public eye. They talked, not about politics, but about life, about their experiences, and about how people could find common ground even in a divided world. No one could have predicted how this story would unfold. What started as an ugly moment of exclusion had turned into something completely unexpected, a story of grace, redemption, and the power of dialogue. And in the end, it wasn't just about Karoline Leavitt or Greg Dawson. It was about the lesson they had both learned. That sometimes, the most powerful response isn't anger or retaliation, but simple, unwavering kindness. In a world where division often seems to be the norm, the events surrounding Karoline Leavitt's removal from Mason's Grill became more than just a viral news story. It became a lesson in leadership, grace, and the importance of standing firm in one's values without resorting to hostility. What could have been a moment of anger and confrontation instead turned into an opportunity for reflection and growth, both for those directly involved and for those watching from the sidelines. Karoline's response was not just about making a point, it was about setting an example. She could have easily lashed out, taken legal action, or encouraged her supporters to attack the restaurant. Instead, she chose dignity. She chose composure. She chose to remind people that disagreement doesn't have to lead to disrespect. That single moment, captured on video and shared across the internet, resonated deeply with many who felt that society had lost the ability to have civil discourse. On the other side, Greg Dawson's journey was equally compelling. At first, he had stood by his decision, believing he was protecting his business and its customers. But as the backlash grew, and he took the time to reflect, he began to see that he had allowed emotions and outside pressures to dictate his actions. His eventual willingness to apologize showed that growth is possible, even in the face of public scrutiny. His decision to meet with Karoline was a sign that real conversations, genuine, open-minded discussions, still have a place in today's world. The story also served as a wake-up call for many businesses, reminding them of the fine line between personal beliefs and professional responsibility. It highlighted the dangers of allowing politics to dictate customer service and reinforced the idea that inclusivity should mean making space for differing viewpoints, not shutting them out. Beyond the individuals involved, the larger conversation sparked by the incident became a crucial one. It forced people to ask themselves difficult questions. Where do we draw the line between private business rights and public discrimination? How do we balance free speech with mutual respect? And, most importantly, how do we move forward as a society without silencing those with whom we disagree? In the end, the most shocking part of this story was not that a restaurant manager kicked out a political figure. It wasn't even the public outrage or the viral media coverage. The real surprise came in the form of an unexpected resolution. One where humility triumphed over pride, dialogue replaced division, and an act of exclusion led to a lesson in unity. Karoline Leavitt's response to being thrown out of a restaurant didn't just define her character, it reminded the world of something far greater. It showed that true leadership isn't about dominating an argument or proving a point at any cost. It's about standing firm in your beliefs while extending grace to those who oppose you. It's about being the bigger person when the world expects you to fight back. As the dust settled and the media moved on to the next big headline, one thing remained clear. Moments of conflict can become opportunities for change. And in an era where division often rules the day, stories like this remind us that there's still power in kindness, wisdom in restraint, and hope in the possibility of understanding one another, despite our differences.